Sorry in advance for a video that most of you will find boring. Today's video is a bit more serious and deals with unfair camping fees in Ontario. So if you don't camp here, if you never intend to camp here, don't care about the paddling politics of this province, then tune out now. Here's a quick summary of what's going on. In April of 2020, a flat rate policy was adopted for the backcountry of some parks, namely the Temagami cluster of parks, where a backcountry site now costs $32.50 per night, regardless of the size of the group, and at the Massasagua Provincial Park, where the rate now exceeds $40 per night. Instead of paying the typical $9 per night per person, or $11 per person per night in a few parks, they're now enforcing a flat rate. So if you're a soloist, you would now be paying 3 to 4 times what you normally would have. And that's also before taxes, which brings the cost to $37 and $46 respectively. Plus there's a reservation fee of $10. That is insane. I'm happy to pay reasonable taxes to live in this great country. I'm happy to pay reasonable fees to support the parks. And I'm behind Ontario Parks' quest for self-sufficiency so that no matter what government is in power, they can fund their own operations. But it should not be solely on the backs of soloists and small parties. Funny enough, the 2 parks that are currently affected are where I started out. The Massasauga is where I took my first backcountry trip, and Temagami is where I really cut my teeth as a backcountry paddler. I was on a shoestring budget then, and I'm certainly not rich now. I could not have afforded these rates then, and I can't justify them now. If I went on a 10-night trip, I can justify $90 of fees to support the parks. But I can't justify $325 for that same trip in Temagami, nor over $400 in the Massasauga. Imagine if you wanted to go to the movies or an amusement park and the price was a flat rate of $100, regardless of whether you went alone or as a group of 9. Let's say you go alone and shell out that amount of money, which is difficult for you financially, and then the 4-person family behind you in line pays the same price. Oh, and their aunt and their uncle and their grandparents and their cousin Eddie, they're catching up from the parking lot and they're all getting in for the same price that you got in for. Not only is it not fair, but it makes absolutely no sense. It's price gouging. Remember when the pandemic first hit and people were hoarding hand sand and toilet paper and charging ridiculous prices for them? What our government is doing here is very similar. They control the supply of parks, and they're treating them like a commodity, which is sickening, and then pricing the commodity unfairly. Ironically, they created a website where you can report people who are price gouging on toilet paper, but they're allowed to do it for our wilderness. You might be thinking that this policy is great for big families or youth groups that go into the backcountry. That thought crossed my mind too, and that I'm just complaining because they win and I lose from this policy as someone who paddles primarily solo or just with Aaron. But that's not the case. It actually makes a little or no difference for them because the youth under 18 in their party already pay half the normal rate or less in some parks, whereas it makes a huge difference for a soloist or groups of 2. Some people are loners and others are just lonely. Why should they be punished? A lot of us seek the rejuvenating benefits of solitude, and we paddlers are, for the most part, not rich. When the policy turns our wilderness into a commodity that's unaffordable for the average citizen, that's not okay. It's making it financially inaccessible, and instead of being a resource we all share and take pride in, they're making it exclusively for the wealthy. Our parks and wilderness should always be treated as a public resource. The most concerning thing is that it's not just these parks where this is going to be an issue. If you're thinking, I don't paddle these parks or I don't plan to, I just won't, well, there's more to it. I contacted the park superintendent for Temagami, who gave me what I've come to learn is the canned response for inquiries about this topic. In his email back to me, he wrote, Ontario Parks is moving from the current per person per night fee to a flat per campsite fee model for the backcountry camping. By doing so, we are streamlining the backcountry fee structure across the province and making it consistent with our car camping fee model. Note that he said Ontario Parks as a whole and across the province. This wording gives the impression that this pricing is going to be phased in across all parks in Ontario, not just Temagami and the Massasauga. I got this impression elsewhere in our discussion as well, and from discussions I've had with others, some of whom have an inside scoop, it also sounds like this is just the tip of the iceberg, and they're going to roll it out to other parks in the province. Now you could argue that a soloist is occupying a site, and that site could have been occupied by multiple ratepayers at one time, and that's not fair. But this flat rate now approaches the cost of car camping campsites, with all the staffing and infrastructure involved in maintaining those facilities like washrooms, paved roads, significant staffing requirements, signage, and more. Does that seem fair when a backcountry site may have no infrastructure at all, and given how little funding there is for maintenance of routes in the province? I realize that there are some costs in maintaining backcountry routes, but they can't be close to the cost of campground sites, yet they want us to pay almost the same. Not to mention that this could actually be a revenue-losing policy. Some paddlers are just going to spend their money elsewhere because the cost is unreasonable, and others will still go and just not pay the fee at all, because the odds of running into a warden and getting caught out there are very slim. Pricing should be tiered into groups to make it financially accessible for everyone. If they don't want to price it by person anymore, then at least use tiered groups. For instance, a rate for a group of up to 2 people, another rate for up to 4, or up to 9. Or just go back to per person per night pricing. I asked the Temagami Superintendent where public input could be sent about this. He passed me along to the Manager of Operations for Ontario Parks Northeast to discuss it further, and he gave me the same rationale and said that feedback could be sent to him. These changes were introduced as a 2-year trial, which is set to end next April 2022. If we don't voice our opinion on this now, these rates could be the reality for the future of backcountry camping in Ontario. So if you agree with me that this policy is unfair, what can you do? First of all, we can post about this on our social media accounts and encourage other people to share it as well, because there's not nearly enough awareness about the issue. I'm actually just coming to be aware of it now, and it's been around for almost a year. Secondly, a petition has been circulating on this already. Please go and sign it. It'll only take a few seconds, so this is really the simplest way you can support this cause. As of today, it has about 1,000 signatures, but we really need to get that to more like 10,000 to make an impact. The third way you can support this cause is by contacting the government officials who make these policies. The contacts are below, along with the website where you can find your own MECP to include on the email. I'll include a draft letter below which you can copy and paste if you want and send it to the government contacts listed here. Let them know that this policy is not acceptable. If we paddlers remain quiet about this, then we can expect these changes to get rolled out across the province and start paying these fees everywhere. But if we come together now and raise our voices, then we can stop this 2-year trial in its tracks. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you'll join us in the fight to keep Ontario's backcountry accessible for everyone.